Hey, Fedheads, welcome to another episode of Sharing Our Pairings. This is Sharing Our Pairings episode 119, Bishops Blend by Black Label Trading Company. I'm your host, John, the Cigar Surgeon. We are broadcast live around the world and picked up on the Armed Forces Radio Network. Of course, you can tune in live on Facebook or just tune in to cigarfederation.com, which is where we're housed out of. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Trippy Trent. Trippy, what's going on this lovely Wednesday, buddy?
Not much. It's not too lovely here. As we were talking about in the green room, we've got a forest fire burning about 20 miles from my house. The evacuations, the level 1 evacuations, which means pack your shit and be ready to go, is 7 miles from my house. So we've got quite a bit of smoke in the air here, and it's currently not really safe to be outside. So yesterday I was out in the garage smoking here, and my wife was asking me to please come inside. She was very worried because it's dangerous out there.
What are the odds that the Tripp household are going to have to evacuate?
I don't think we're going to have to evacuate because we're in a pretty residential area. I mean, really, we're on the edge of a very residential area. And I think that if the fires really got within about 5 miles is when they'd start getting into neighborhoods and they would kind of go crazy trying to put the fires out.
Fair enough.
But at this point, they have been working on it for a few days, and it's officially 0% contained, which is always good to hear.
Thanks, kids. Appreciate it. Thanks for setting fire. That's awesome. And, I have very little to complain about in comparison. We were talking offline that, of course, now there's fires in Washington, there's fires in Oregon, there's fires in Manitoba, there's fires in British Columbia. So essentially every day I wake up to a haze of smoke, my car covered in ash, and we're nowhere near any of the fires. Like all these fires are anywhere between 600 and 1,000 miles away. But the smoke is it's crazy. It's been a very fire-rich season.
Yeah, it's been crazy here up until this point. It was not terrible. There was a point where it was like the air quality index was, I think, like 290 or something, which is crazy high. That's like if you're at the smog level in Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when they were burning thousands of miles away. Today, I think the air index was 271. Which is pretty terrible. 50 is considered unhealthy.
I enjoyed last week waking up, and of course we got to keep our windows open at night because I don't have air conditioning like a pleb. And I walked into my spare room, which is my computer room, and it honestly it smelled like I had lit a campfire in the room, like as if a fresh campfire had just been stamped out.
Oh, so when I was out on Sunday night, I think it was Sunday night. It might have been Monday. Holiday weekends mess my my gauge on what day it is up. But it smelled and felt like you were sitting at a campfire at that moment when the campfire like blows in your face and all the smoke comes at you. Just walking outside was like that. It was terrible.
I just need the cigar smoke nowadays to make my clothes smell normal.
Yeah.
But of course, natural disasters aside, and there have been quite a few natural disasters lately, we're smoking cigars and drinking beers and various alcoholic substances. And, it seems timely that we're smoking a Bishops Blend because we have a good guest on tomorrow night.
Yeah, it seemed like the right time to smoke something from Fabrica Ovea Negra.
Black Label, son.
Yeah, and then I got the hat fresh off the presses.
Yeah. We're smoking the Bishops Blend. They said you're smoking the 2017, right? The new hotness?
Yes. And I know that. I really appreciate that they did this. I know that it's probably more of a branding thing than a keeping a little bit of difference between the years. But the original release had kind of like a neon red gloss color, and this one's got like candy apple red.
Uh-huh.
So when I open my humidor, I know which one is which I like.
If I remember right, the 2016 landed number 2 on my top 25 cigars of 2016. And I'm fully I'm so glad to have got my dirty, filthy weasel hands on a box of these because I think this is going to easily land in the top 5. for me. Of course, that being said, I haven't smoked that new hotness. That new hotness. I heard from a guy that Boondock Saints is legit.
Yeah. It's interesting because I went into that cigar knowing that it was a Black Label cigar, or actually Blackworks cigar, and so that I would probably like it. But as soon as I lit it, it was like next level good. And I would put that up. We were talking last week about 100s and Padrones. I would put this up against a Padrone any day.
Maybe I should light it up for tomorrow night when we got James Brown of Black Label Trading Company on.
I don't know if you'd be able to even focus on the show. It's so good.
I'm okay with that. You can just run the show, and I'll just make groaning sounds in the background and make everyone uncomfortable at once. It'll be highly entertaining. Tell us a little bit about the blend, Trippy. We're smoking two different sizes. I'm smoking the Corona Largo, and you're smoking the Robusto.
The Robusto, which is I noted everything but the sizes. I believe this is like a 5.5 by 50. It's a little bigger. Or at least it appears a little slimmer than a regular Robusto. It might be like a 49 ring gauge. But of course, this was first launched at IPCPR 2016, and the first release sold out. And as Black Label,
like immediately, in 5 seconds,
it was very highly anticipated. And I really like that Black Label, every limited edition they've done so far, with the exception of the Deliverance, which actually did end up coming back recently for 4th on 5th cigars. Every single, or I'm sorry, not the Deliverance, the Nocturne, I think.
Nocturne.
No, maybe it was the Deliverance. I don't remember. No, I think it was the Nocturne. You're right. But every single limited edition they've done has been like an annual release. From the Morphines to the Bishops Blend. And I really like that because limited editions, the problem is if you buy it and you really love it, you may never be able to buy it again. And with Black Label, if you buy it and you love it, you're like, all right, well, next year I'm getting a box instead of a 5-pack.
Well, the worst thing for me, especially for the limited Blackworks, and at this point, everything seems to sell out regardless of production levels. But by the time I get around to smoking it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can get my hands on it. It's like, yeah, dog, that's been sold out for 3 months. Like, there's none. Nobody's got any weaseled in the back corner distribution office. There's none.
And then you only have to wait 8 or 9 months for the next release, which is great.
Yeah.
So it's nice that they have like the resources where they can come out with something limited edition that's using a rare tobacco, but they can still secure the same tobaccos in a different vintage for the following year, so that you can get maybe not exactly the same experience, but a very similar cigar.
It works for me. So what do we got? I mean, obviously we're using Nicaraguan tobaccos.
Yeah, so the wrapper and binder on this are both Ecuadorian. The wrapper is Ecuadorian Maduro. The binder is Ecuadorian Habano. And the fillers are a combination of Nicaraguan and Pennsylvania and Connecticut broadleafs. So there's so much of that like sweet, spicy richness that you get from broadleaf. And I like the combination of the Pennsylvania and Connecticut, because Connecticut tends to be kind of sweet and oily, and Pennsylvania tends to be sweet but very spicy. And you definitely kind of get the best of both worlds with this blend. And
I know we've talked to James in the past, at least we talked to him at the IPCPR, that it's kind of interesting to see Pennsylvania, or really at this point, like broadleaf for Pennsylvania, used as a filler tobacco, because so often people just either, I don't even think people use it as a binder, they just use it as a wrapper, period. Nobody really, like, I think there's like 2 cigars on the market that might use it as filler tobacco. So it's to me, it's an interesting change up. It's always nice to see somebody willing to push the envelope of what is sort of considered the standard for how people use that tobacco with cigar blending.
Yeah, kind of go unconventional with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of what Black Label's all about, is making unconventional blends that are really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's boutique, and obviously we're crazy for the boutiques, but there's a lot of factories out there where I like a lot of their cigars, and then they'll have a release where I'm like, it's a really good cigar, but it just doesn't hit my palate right. I don't really find that with Black Label. I pick up a cigar, and I think it's almost working against them now, because I kind of pick up a Black Label stick and I expect it to be very good. And
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
think,
you've got a level of expectation for it.
very high. So I think at this point it might even be working against them because they've had such a high level of performance for releases that at this point, if they release something that's just good, I mean, I'm just going to trash it because I'm going to be like, well, this is not up to the standard that we've come to expect. They've
Yeah.
really driven this high level of excellence, and it's not even just the blend, it's the design. I mean, one of the things we didn't really show on the cigars, it's got that like 10 or the 109 Cuban type cap on it.
It's not quite a 109. It's like a nipple cap kind of.
Yeah,
It's a very different shape.
yeah. It's a Cuban style cap.
Yeah. And so talking about the blends, so for me, I actually rewatched the IPCPR interview we did with James yesterday when I was posting my Boondock Saints review.
Nice.
And he said that when they came out of the gate, against all reason, they came out with a bunch of blends, and a couple of those blends are the only ones from Black Label that I've had that I don't like.
Interesting.
And I think it's because they wanted to appeal to a wider range when they first released. They wanted to have a cigar for every wheelhouse, and some of those cigars just aren't in my wheelhouse.
But it makes sense from for those who aren't aware, Black Label is really split into two kind of groups now. They've got the Black Label Trading Company, which is your mainstream release. Bishops Blend falls under that. But you got your Last Rites, you got all these regular lines. You can see them by the I call them the white label releases. And then they got Blackwork Studio, which James really said is just to kind of play with tobacco and come out with funky releases, not only just in the blend, but in the design and the style of wrappers, just pushing the envelope of what they do to try and have fun with it.
Yeah, I like that everything. I mean, we're going to talk about all this tomorrow night, so it seems kind of silly to keep going over it, but I have a lot to talk about for it. It's cool that every single cigar that comes out under the Blackwork Studios name has some kind of artistic touch to it.
Yeah.
Some of them have like the double wrapper barber pole thing. Like the Green Hornet doesn't really have a barber pole, but it's got like that foot that's wrapped in candela and a little bit in the head. And then the Boondock Saint that I smoked yesterday has this really interesting blunt foot where they said they kind of flipped the cigar instead of rotating it. So what would normally be the head of the cigar in the mold is kind of forming the foot a little bit. And they just kind of do stuff like that because they can, which is cool.
And there is some sort of boutique or some artisanal touches. We talked about the cap on the Bishop's Blend. I didn't mention the fact that it's got that closed foot. So they've got a bit of wrapper tobacco over the foot. And I actually have really come to appreciate a closed foot. I mean, it's a bit of a downer that you can't nose the filler tobacco before you light it. But I do find that obviously it's got a foot band, and in addition to the foot band, it's got the wrapper that's covering the foot, and I think that serves as a level of protection against damaging that cigar from fat fingers trying to do a little Tetris in the humidor.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, of course, here on Sharing Our Pairings, we don't just talk cigars, we do pairings. But before we get into our pairings, I'm going to play a little ad spot from one of our show sponsors here. And we'll get right into it. So stay tuned. Brought to you by Gurkha Cigars. Gurkha Cigars, makers of the world's finest cigars. Try the 93 rated Heritage featuring a Rosado Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, Nicaraguan binder, and Dominican, Pennsylvanian, and Nicaraguan fillers. Blended by Gurkha's blending team at American Caribbean Cigars, it is hand-rolled Nicaraguan, available in 35-count boxes. Talk to your local B&M about the Heritage today, or talk to them about other fine Gurkha cigars. Whatever your taste preferences, Gurkha has a cigar that's right for you. So we've been talking about the cigar, but we haven't really been talking about the Black Label Bishop's Blend flavor profile, and it does start out quite spicy, but like you were saying, it's very rich. It's got I don't know how to describe it other than to say it's rich. It's got layers of nuanced complexity to it, even though it's strong.
It's hard to describe because I feel like there's so many layers of flavor, unless you're like in Zen mode where you're really, really focusing on pulling out each flavor, and like focusing on how it feels and tastes on your palate. It just tastes good. There's some richness there. There's some like a serious amount of cocoa, like kind of a sweet, rich. I don't know. The way that I would describe it is like a dark chocolate that's kind of sweet. Not like the 85% cacao, but like if you get a Hershey's dark chocolate bar, um, it's got like that really chocolatey but really sweet flavor. And then there's a ton of earth, and of course that kind of backbone of pepper and crazy spicy retrohale.
And I'm about an inch in, and it's doing a bit of a transition where some of that spiciness is giving up a little bit, and I've got what I would almost describe as malted barley going on. Like it's that like that's the
Hmm.
only way I could describe it. It's like a the rich toasted barley, and I just want to chew it. I don't even want to smoke it. I just want to chew it. That's what my mouth is telling me.
Yeah, that I get
Yeah.
that too.
Before we get into the first pairing of the night, do we have any comments, questions, feedback from our audience?
Uh, the only comment we have so far, Don Bleeker says he has had one of these in Lancero on his birthday, and it was great.
No, you didn't, Don.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't
No,
think he had the Lancero
no.
since there
You
isn't one,
you might have had a
unfortunately.
you might have had a Corona of the Bishops Blend, or it's possible because I think they only do a Lancero in the Deliverance, the
The morphine.
Morphine, and the Last Rites. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
So it could have been one of those. Which, hey man, if you got a Lancero from Black Label Trading Company, that's a happy time right there for your birthday. I got to tell you, that's a great way to
Y-
celebrate.
Yeah, I've never had a bad Lancero from him.
So let's switch things up. Normally I go first, but I have had a week and it's only halfway through. It's really only 2 days in. It's not even
Yeah,
really Wednesday, it's Tuesday, but I've had a bit of a week. So Trippy, why don't you start us off and talk about your first
sure.
pairing?
So my first pairing comes from Clown Shoes Beer. Uh, I wasn't familiar with the story of Clown Shoes, which is really interesting. It started off with this liquor store in Lexington, Massachusetts, and they entered like a beer advocate contest for naming a beer, and they came in fifth place. And they decided, well, if they're not going to pick our name, we'll just make our own beer. And they already had a distribution license in Massachusetts, so they figured, why don't we just make a beer and distribute it? They were just planning on making one beer. They ended up contracting the brewing with Mercury Brewing Company in 2009, which is in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and it just kind of took off. And uh, they now are also brewing some of their stuff at Stony Creek, which is in Branford, Connecticut, and Schmaltz Brewing in upstate New York. But all of their kind of core lines, annual releases, and uh, year round releases are all brewed by Mercury in Ipswich. And another interesting thing, they actually kind of poached the head brewer of Mercury, and he's now their head brewer, which basically he comes up with the recipes and stuff and oversees the production. But he's not actually in the brewery every day because they're contracting the brewing out.
Nice.
Um, and so the one that I'm drinking is the Barista. And this is also an interesting beer. I just picked it up because it sounded like a good combination of flavors. But I was reading about him, and in 2011, I think it was, might have been like 2010, they had a beer called Brown Angel that had a picture of this very same angel character that you can barely see because my stage lights are too bright. Um, but she was kind of an exotic dancer, and like it was a view from the back that kind of highlighted her her better assets.
Assets.
Uh, and they got a lot of backlash about that. There
Mhm.
were so many people, like there were a bunch of people who were saying they'll never drink beer from them again. So the story with this beer that came out in January of last year, this is the 2017 release, not the 2016 release. It's called the Barista because she retired from dancing and she's now brewing coffee in a high-end coffee house. So this is a breakfast brown ale. So it's a brown ale brewed with espresso, oatmeal, and milk sugars. Um, and they kind of detail the malts a little bit, but barely. It's American malts, English malts, and flaked oats. And the espresso is actually cold brewed. And it just sounds like you don't see many coffee age brown ales, and you can't
Mm.
see quite how red it is on the camera there because it's got a little more color than like a porter, and it clocks in at 8.5% ABV,
Whew.
uh, and they don't disclose how many IBUs it is, but I suspect it's pretty low in like the range of 15 to 25 maybe.
Interesting. All right, that
What
sounds
are you
good.
drinking?
So I haven't had this on the show in a really long time, and I'm kind of kind of shocked actually. I went back and looked at our show notes, and we haven't featured this in like, or at least I haven't featured this in like 60 episodes. Maybe because it's just too easy. Flor de Cana. Ooh, girl, it's that Flor de Cana Centenario 18. I mean, you gots to, especially with the Nicaraguan cigar. I mean, what better represents Nicaragua for drinks other than, Flor de Cana? And 18 is my jam. I was actually briefly considering the 12, and I think the 12 would actually go really well with the Bishops Blend as well.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the 12 has a little bit more roughness to it, but in a good way. And I think, the Bishop's Blend is a little rough with that spiciness. I mean, it does have lots of elegant nuance to the flavors, but I had to go with the 18. I had to. And of course, since I haven't talked about Florida Canyon ages, I'll just remind people, first of all, obviously, they're in Nicaragua. Nicaraguan produced rum. They actually have a tradition of rum making that dates back to 1890. When the farmers there at the base of San Cristobal volcano were basically aging spirits and making rum. Because, hey, you're growing sugarcane, you got to make rum. That's just how it works. This particular rum was only launched in 2005, which makes sense. It's an 18-year-old rum. Now, I won't get into the details of age statements, but 18-year-old rum doesn't necessarily mean it's all 18-year-old rum. That's not how age statements work in rum. But it did win the 2015 Medalla de Oro in the San Francisco World Spirits competition, which is kind of awesome. And Florida Canyon first introduced their sort of what you would say marketed products in 1937, and then started exporting 1959. So they've been on the market for a while. In 1980, they kind of maybe looked towards the future and started vast aging and storing of rum, perhaps anticipating some of the demand for aged product. And they used the original barrel houses from the startup in Chichigalpa. The warehouses are built without air conditioning. So it's really kind of getting all the elements of Nicaragua as a part of that aging process. There's no ventilation, there's no air conditioning. It's just air. So it's just the natural conditions, the rain, the wind, whatever's going on in Chichigalpa. They say that it slow ages the rum and it gives it that specific taste they're looking for. All Florida Canyon rum is distilled 5 times during production, including the 18. And of course, they use ex-bourbon charred white oak barrels. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this about Florida Canyon. This is always fun when you go back to look at a product. It is kosher certified.
Really?
I had no idea.
I never knew that either.
I mean, I don't even know what the qualifications are for kosher, but they say it's kosher. And who am I to tell them they're not kosher? So I'm going to take some sips here. I mean, I've been sipping for like a half an hour, I'll be honest, but I'm going to take some more sips and let you talk about how your tasting experience is going so far with the Conchas.
This beer is really interesting because when you smell it, you get kind of the coffee notes and you get the oatmeal. It smells kind of like you're sitting down for breakfast with oatmeal and a cup of coffee. But what I'm used to is like a coffee stout. And you're not getting all of that roastiness and those chocolatey kind of smells that are really common with stouts. And that kind of carries over onto the flavor that there's actually a little more bitterness than I was expecting. I would bump my estimate up to like 35, maybe 40 IBUs because it's got a little bit of like hoppy bite. But it's really kind of you're tasting more of the oatmeal and coffee than you are of the kind of malts like you do in a stout.
Makes sense for a brown ale.
And the coffee goes really well with the cigar. I wasn't sure whether this cigar would pair well with coffee or not.
I could see that. I mean, with a cold brew, you're really removing a lot of the acidity out of the coffee, so you're really going for a smoother. And I'm sure those milk sugars are giving a lot of sweetness there. I'm sure you have to balance that out to make sure it's not too sweet, cloyingly sweet. But yeah, I could see that going really well.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's not very sweet at all. Actually, now that you mention it, I wasn't even thinking about the milk sugars because there's not enough sweetness there for my brain to immediately go to added sugars.
Probably a good thing for a brown ale.
Yeah.
So this Florida Canyon Centenario 18. I can't, it's been a while since I've had the 18, but I'm getting a lot more spice out of the rum Than I sort of anticipated in my brain. I was expecting a much more rich, sweet experience, and I think the combination of the cigar. It's interesting because I'm getting the spice off the cigar, and it's pulling spice out of the rum. And it's like I was really worried the rum was going to be too sweet for the cigar, but it's working really well together. The rum is accenting the cigar, and the cigar is in turn accenting the rum, which it's probably not the most complex pairing I've ever done, but it's interesting because it's one of those few moments where cigar pulls stuff out of the rum pulls stuff out of the cigar, which to me is a great sign of a good pairing. It's just that I was expecting maybe a little bit more out of the rum and a little bit more out of the cigar. I think the problem here is that the rum, believe it or not, isn't intense enough for this cigar. I think the cigar is just so full
Oh
bodied
wow.
that maybe a better choice would have been a Zacapa or a Zaya. Um, yeah, not to say, like I said, not to say it's a bad pairing. It's just not maybe what I was expecting out of this pairing.
Or maybe one of the younger Flor de Canas.
Mm,
Flor de Cana tends to get a little less full bodied the
yes.
older it gets.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe the 12 would have been the right call here because the 12 does have a little bit more of that bite, that youngness brings a little bit more character for it. And I've got enough Bishops Blend that I can certainly revisit with the Florida Canyon 12 and see if that's maybe a better way to go.
Man, I love the retro hail on this cigar. It's
Mhm.
so it's so complex. It's got so much sweetness, uh, and it's very different. I almost said unique, but it's very different.
I think
Because I'm just not used to having a retro hail that's got that much sweet and spice.
I mean, I think what I like about any manufacturer of cigars is when you can come out with a product that has characteristics of their factory, but isn't like I can't say, yeah, this is like the Nocturne, this is like the Deliverance, because it's
Yeah,
not. It's not like any of the other products they make. It is a unique flavor profile within their thing that, yeah, you can tell it's from Black Label, but you can't really draw a comparison between some of the other cigars they make, which that's I dig that.
yeah, it's definitely very different from anything else they make. It's got some similar tobaccos and similar flavors, and you can tell that it fits in with the rest of their lines. Like you, when you smoke it, you know you're smoking a Black Label, but at the same time, it's really got its own character from the rest of their line.
So I could certainly drink Florida Canyon all night and be a happy camper. But I'm going to go right into my second pairing, which I was telling you offline. I can't believe, and if our audience is out there, please look at our shows. I don't think I've ever featured this in the show, and I feel like that's a crying shame because this is one of the great breweries in Canada, Unibroue from Quebec, and the name is kind of interesting. It's the Seigneuriale, which kind of immediately brings to mind the Seigneuriale cigar, but it's a Seigneuriale beer, which is a brown ale. It's a Belgian style brown ale, and Unibroue is one of the great Quebec breweries. There's a lot of really great Quebec breweries. They're located in Chambly, Quebec. And the brewery itself was purchased out by Sleeman in 2004, and then Sleeman was purchased out by Sapporo in 2006. This is one of the first of three microbrewing companies in the Greater Montreal area, so it's got a lot of history there. This is a top fermented Belgian style brown ale. It's the specs on this. They've got a lot of specs, and I dig it. It's 7.5% ABV, which that's Quebec style, a little bit more oomph to it. 15 SRMs, 33 IBUs, and they have a recommended serving temperature between 8 and 12 degrees science or Celsius and 46 to 54 degrees freedom. Beer Advocate only gave it an 87, which I'm surprised because I'm drinking this and I'm thinking this is an 89, 90. This is really good. It's chewy.
uh,
It's delicious.
so I'm drinking a rum that I got from John uh, when we were in Vegas, and it I didn't know what it was. I just picked it, and John told me a little bit about it, and then I didn't really start doing research on it until right before the show. And I of course don't have a bottle for it, but this is Legendario, the Elixer de Cuba, which obviously means elixir of Cuba. Um, it's a rum that's also got raisin extract and a little bit of water, and they call it a rum punch. It's not really classified as a rum. Um, and I've already taken a couple sips, and it's just very different. I'll talk about it more after John talks about his tasting notes. But it's not what I was expecting from John.
So before we get into our tasting notes, here's a word from one of our sponsors. This show is sponsored by Cigar Oasis. Don't spend all your time worrying about your cigar wrappers cracking, splitting, or falling apart from humidity fluctuation issues. Set it and forget it by choosing Cigar Oasis, a professional solution which provides equal distribution of humidity with precise electronic controls. Monitor your cigars through the internet using the Smart Humidor Wi-Fi attachment. Why don't you spend all your time enjoying your cigars and relaxing, and let Cigar Oasis protect your cigars? Cigar Oasis has solutions for any humidor. Make sure you set it and forget it today. You are tuned in to Sharing Our Pairings, episode 119, Bishops Blend by Black Label Trading Company. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon, joined as always by my co-host, Trippy Trent. We are smoking the Bishops Blend and doing some pairings. I am pairing the Unibroue Seigneuriale, which is, I'm sorry, my French is not very good. I need to work on it. It's good. I'll hold it up here. It is very Belgian style. It's got a nice, great, thick, creamy head. It's got that cloudy Belgian style look to it. It's a brown, but it's like a light brown, so it's almost like a golden brown. And I was a little worried that the IBUs, I mean, it's not super high, 33, but it's kind of, another 5 IBUs. It's kind of getting a little into that IPA territory. But when you do, I find with a lot of Belgian style beers, you get this really nice fruity undercurrent to it, and it's very chewy. Like that fermented yeast comes out to me is like it's very chewy. It's got a great mouthfeel. This is going really well with the cigar. I think it's both in the sense of the flavors, but also the mouthfeel, because it's got such a nice creamy mouthfeel. That's a great matchup for the cigar, because the cigar does also have a great mouthfeel, and I find that this is doing a great job of accenting the cigar, and it's got enough body to it that the cigar is not running the beer over. So this, to me, so far, really, really digging this. I'm going to take a couple more sips and get my brain into the tasting notes.
So, like I was saying before, the Legendario is not really what I would expect somebody to drink with a cigar. It's not something that you're going to pour a couple fingers of and drink with a high-end cigar expecting a rum experience. It reminds me a lot of a Manhattan, but maybe a touch sweeter and without like the bitters. But actually, I think a dash of bitters could actually do a lot for this. It's hard to describe because it's like sweetened rum that's got a little bit more character because of the raisin flavors. But that being said, it goes really well with a cigar. I'm really surprised by how well it actually goes with a cigar. The sweetness really brings out some of like the coffee notes in the cigar, some of like that kind of earthy bitterness, but not in a bad way, not in like an overpowering bitterness kind of way. I mean, in a coffee bitterness kind of way, which is the good kind of bitter.
Yeah,
I could see this going well with a lot of cigars. And as we were saying, as I was saying during the break, I feel like the raisin notes would go really well with something like an Opus X. I mean, it seems crazy to pair an Opus X with something that. How much did you say a bottle of this cost in Cuba, John?
It's $6. Well, it's not $6. It's $6.50 Kook convertible CUC, which is roughly $6.50 US.
Yeah,
for a bottle.
I mean that's crazy cheap, and it's definitely like it's kind of in between a liqueur and a liquor.
Yeah.
It's not quite sweet enough or fruity enough to be a liqueur. But I'm just enjoying it a lot more than I was expecting to.
Yeah, I mean it is as you say, it's not what you expect when you try for the first time. I think it really comes off immediately. That raisin, I think, supercharges the sweetness there, and it almost comes across cloyingly sweet. But once your palate adjusts to it, that sweetness it doesn't linger super, super long. I'd say it's got like maybe a medium finish. But I mean, it's just ridiculously cheap. And obviously I've paired it with a gargantuan amount of Cuban cigars, but I've also got into pairing with non-Cuban cigars. And I think it's great, the fact that it's super cheap. It does do a great job of accenting cigars. And I think because it does come across, like you said, like a liqueur, it's got an intensity of flavor that does stand up to a range of cigars. I've paired it with Connecticut Shade, and I've paired it all the way up to the darkest, dankest Connecticut Broadleaf. and it seems to stand up, and it doesn't run the cigar over. I mean, it's kind of one of those great rums that just seems like it's designed to pair with cigars, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like the perfect use for this would be if I was like having a herf with like 5 or 10 buddies over, and we were all smoking cigars and drinking whiskey, and I would say, just try this next one, and then pour it out of the room and bring it in and give it to them, and they'll smell it and go, "Wow, that smells surprisingly sweet," and then taste it and be like, "What is this?"
Mhm.
And then by the end of the night, everybody would want a bottle.
Yeah, I was actually at a herf, just like, gosh, I think it was like a week ago, and there's a bunch of people there that had the Legendario for the first time, and a lot of them said like literally the same thing. They're like, "Whoa, what is this?" And then they let it settle in. They're like, "This is going really well." And we had a variety of different cigars at the herf, and no one complained about the pairing. Everyone's, I think most people went for a second pouring, but I think it is because it does have that intensity of flavor, that intensity of sweetness. It's not really something you could sit like. It's not like a Zyre, a Kappa, or a Flor where I could sit down and maybe finish half a bottle. You'd get
Yeah.
a couple pours in, and you'd be like, okay, it's time to move on to another rum because my palate's getting a little burned out.
Yeah, I feel like if you had more than 1 or 2, maybe 3 glasses of this, your palate would be just so wrecked that it wouldn't be worth drinking anything else. I feel like this is a nice like if you're going out for a long night kind of herf, like where you're herfing from like 7 o'clock till 1 a.m.
Hmm.
This is nice for the first cigar.
And it goes really well with espresso, believe it or not. So if you're late at night or Cuban coffee, late at night, Legendario on one side, espresso on the other. Have a sip of espresso, a little Legendario. Your palate just dances, like it just does funky things to your palate, and it's it's a fun experience.
Yeah, and I mean it is almost, it's like on the edge of overly sweet.
Yep.
It's very, very sweet. But I mean, it just complements the cigar really well. It brings out the richness of the cigar.
Speaking of the richness of the cigar, so I'm kind of getting into the halfway point, maybe just into the middle third, and it
Hmm.
does that great switch up where the cacao and the creaminess of that cigar really starts to come through on the retrohale. The spice kind
Yeah,
of is given up at this point.
yeah,
It's so rich. It's so good. I'm so glad that I have a box of this cigar because if I'd smoked 2 or 3 of them and then ran out, like if I'd only got a fiver, I would have been so sad. Talking about the pairing, still going well. I'm kind of power bombing this beer because it's just going so well. Like I said, I think this is more of a mouthfeel thing than a flavor thing. It's just doing a great job of having a great creamy mouthfeel. I do find that hoppiness is kind of nice. It's a little bit of a palate cleanser between draws. It's. I don't think I'd go any hoppier than this. I think if you were to go to an IPA, you'd have a really dissatisfying pairing experience. This is about right. I could definitely see a Belgian triple or anything with a little bit of fruit with it going really well with this Bishops Blend. I think that'd be an interesting flavor combination.
yeah. I think a Belgian triple would go really well with this cigar.
Uh, so, so good. So before we get into our last pairing of the night, because I'm power bombing my Unibroue, how are we doing for comments, questions, feedbacks, and emoticons on our Facebook Live and/or cigarfederation.com where we're broadcast live?
Well, of course we've got a ton of emoticons as always. Um, Lou Liga is curious. He's not a drinker. He wants to know if this cigar would go well with a Shirley Temple, or I'll amend that and say, what do you think would go well with it for a non-alcoholic pairing?
See, I think a Shirley Temple would be interesting
I
because
actually think so too.
yeah, and actually when you were talking Manhattan, I think anything with an orange bitterness quality to it, that orange would be really interesting with a cigar because I do
Whoa.
find that like any kind of like anything with an orange sharpness to it that's not overpowering with a bourbon. The orange cuts the bourbon, so you don't get the super spice from the bourbon, but the orange would play really interesting with the tobaccos in the cigar, I think.
Yeah, that actually brings me to the San Pellegrino, their sodas,
Mm.
that tangerine soda that they have that has a little paper that you peel off the top.
Yeah.
I think that would actually go really, really well with the cigar.
Which is a tough pairing. I've tried to do San Pellegrinos with cigars. I've tried the grapefruit before. Don't pair the grapefruit with cigar. You're going to have a bad time, in my opinion. But yeah, that'd be really interesting. Like the blood orange San Pellegrino,
Mm-hmm.
that could be kind of funky.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like you kind of hit the nail on the head. Any kind of orangey flavor that has a little bitterness, not like an orange soda because that's
Yeah,
just all sweetness. But any kind of orange flavor that has a little bitterness, I feel like would go really well with it.
orange crush, Dr
Yeah.
Pepper, that'd be sweet
Yeah,
tea.
Dr. Pepper was one of the other ones I was thinking.
Absolutely. Mm, so good. All right,
And Ruben, I tried to say his name last week. I'm not even going to try it this week.
Gold Blood.
He's yes. He says the blood orange San Pellegrino is a good pairing. He
Yeah, all
agrees.
right, there we go. So he knows his pairings. I'm gonna hop into my last pairing of the night. As much as I'm enjoying the second pairing, and I really am. This is one that I've had on the show a little while ago. I saw it on the shelf at one of my local liquor stores here, and reminded myself. I looked it up on Untapped. If you're on Untapped, add me, Cigar Surgeon. And that's a great thing about Untapped. I looked it up, and I'm like, I can't remember if I like this or not, and I do. It's the Stranger Than Fiction by Collective Arts Brewing, and it's nice because it's a sessionable porter. It's really not porter and stout season, but I'm going to drink it anyways. They are based out of Hamilton, Ontario, which is kind of a strange place for a brewery because Hamilton is really kind of a blue collar town. Collective Arts was founded by Bob Russell and Matt Johnston in 2013. They're a grassroots beer company that fuses the craft of brewing with the inspired talents of emerging artists and musicians. So they've kind of got interesting designs and logos and whatnot. Try to hold that up for the audience. I got some cool artistic stuff on the back, which I dig. They're dedicated to promoting artists and raising creative consciousness through the sociability of craft beer. That all sounds good to me. It is a porter. It's a very sessionable, especially for sharing our pairings. 5.5% ABV with only 25 IBUs. So I might have these out of order. We'll see. Beer Advocate score of 89, and the flavor and aroma hops on this are Cascade and Nugget. Very common. Of course, they've got just a gargantuan amount of malts in this. They've got two-row, chocolate, dark chocolate, crystal, biscuit, flaked, wheat, crystal, and carafoam. So malts for days. And it does have, it's obviously very, very dark, but it does have that porter. I don't want to say thinness, but it's not thick and viscous like a stout. It's got a little bit more of that thinness, like I would expect of a porter, with a nice creamy head that's kind of settled a little bit because I did want to give it a chance to settle in the glass before I had a little taste. What do you got up for your third pairing of the night, Trippy?
I've got an oldie but a goodie. So this is I think I had this like a month or two ago. Ardbeg 10.
Mm.
I just kind of wanted to see how Pete would work with this cigar. I'm very unsure of how it's going to go. I haven't actually cheated on this one, so I've never tasted this cigar and this whiskey at the same time. Ardbeg, of course, is on the south coast of Isla. And I didn't know that they were owned by a company which their name is very unwieldy, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Normally I would think of them just as Hennessy or
Hennessy, yeah.
Moet.
Yep.
But I just didn't realize that the entire name was three different companies mashed together.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. They were founded in 1798 and they didn't start production commercially until 1815. Currently, they've got one wash still, one spirit still, and pump out a fairly meager 1.25 million liters or 330,000 freedom gallons. I mean, that's not crazy. It's kind of middle of the road, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's pretty boutique from the Scotch industry because you think of some of the larger distilleries. I mean, some of the larger distilleries are putting out 25 or 30 million liters, a couple million gallons of Freedom Spirit every year. That's a lot of spirit. But they are on Islay, so it's small.
Yeah, it's a little place. And of course, it's generally known as the heavily peated Islay whiskey. As we know, it's not the most heavily peated. And I'm always surprised by the very light straw color for such an intense whiskey.
It's so light. It's not even what I would call golden. It's like a light hay. It looks like someone's watered your whiskey down.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of like Chardonnay. The color of Chardonnay. Like I could see if I was drinking this out of a
Wine glass.
a wine glass.
Yeah.
People would think I was drinking white wine when actually I'm just getting loaded on Isla whiskey.
Till they smelled the campfire from across the room.
Yeah.
All right. Well, normally we would play a third ad spot from one of our sponsors, but our ad spot's a little bit outdated, and we've had a lot of comments, feedback. So I'm just going to do the ad spot like we used to do. Drew Estate, they good.
We can do a little more than that. Download the Drew Estate app.
Drew Diplomat,
check your cigars in.
If you're on the Drew Dip, so I wish I was on the Drew Diplomat app. I can't because we have very strict advertising rules up here in Canada. So unfortunately, the app isn't available in Canada, which makes me very sad. However, if you're a Drew Diplomat member, you have the opportunity to win swag, like crazy swag, not like ashtrays and hats, although ashtrays and hats are available. I'm talking like Flor standing ashtrays,
Those
which
mega
are really
ashtrays.
Oh, bro, amazing. And all you need to do is check in at your local B&M, check in your Drew Estate cigars, check in your Debonair cigars, check in your Hoya cigars. They all count towards your points. Plus, it's kind of a cool social media interaction. There's really no excuse. If you smoke Drew Estate, if you smoke Hoya, if you smoke Debonair, you should really have the Drew Diplomat app.
And a thing that a lot of people don't know about it is if you have the app and you go to a Drew Estate event, like just a sales event where you buy 5 cigars, you get one free, all that stuff. If you have the Drew Estate app and it's a Drew Diplomat event, you just show them that you have the app and they'll give you a free cigar. Right now, I don't know if it's started yet. It might not start till October. But I know the latest press release that we sent out was that the free cigar is now an undercrown sun-grown flying pig. So even if you're not buying anything, swing by that event and pick up your free undercrown sun-grown pig.
Get your weasel on, son. You are, of course, tuned into Sharing Our Pairings, episode 119, Bishops Blend by Black Label Trading Company. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon. We are broadcast on the Armed Forces Radio Network, of course, podcast, Podbean, around the world. If you have a podcast app, you've either got an Apple phone or you've got an Android phone, you can subscribe a number of different ways. We do have a lot of subscribers out there. Thanks very much for subscribing and listening every week. I was actually checking out this morning. We've got people that are tuning into our IPCPR coverage from 2015. Saw a bunch of downloads this morning from the Netherlands, which is kind of cool. It's interesting to see people tuning in to stuff from a couple of years back. That's when our audio got tight.
There must be a bunch of people doing what I usually do, which is when I listen to a new podcast, I start at the beginning. I go back as far as I can and I listen to every single episode.
It's a lot of episodes, man. I mean, Cigar Chat's up to like 257, I think, 256. That's a lot of episodes to go through.
Yeah, I hope you got a long commute if you're trying to do that, or you're never going to catch up.
I am still trying to catch up on all my back episodes of Cigar Authority, Cigar Jukebox, Stogie Geeks, and the Primetime Live shows, and Developing Palates. I've got just a gargantuan amount of back catalog stuff. I'm really caught up to the point where I'm about to either at the IPCPR or just after the IPCPR, so I'm like 3 weeks behind on a ton of content. But because I have a long commute into work and home, obviously, it gives me an opportunity to catch up on some of that content. But that's kind of the nice thing. Listening to a podcast when I drive gets rid of some of that road rage. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. So something I've never picked up on this whiskey before, ever. You may have noticed that I was nosing it more than anyone should. I don't know if it's the cigar, but to me, it smells like a peat-fired bag of Twizzlers. Like that.
Interesting.
That sugary, fake strawberry kind of licorice. It's very strange. But I really enjoy that kind of nose note.
That's really interesting. No, I don't think I've ever picked up Twizzler from Ardbeg. Certainly, I get a lot of that saltiness. I get brininess. I get coastal. I'll have to go back to my Ardbegs. Now, unfortunately, I did do a pairing misstep, which happens here on Sharing Our Pairings. It's part of the fun of pairing. And this beer, which I've rated a 4 out of 5 on Untapped because it's delicious. This beer, shockingly, is just getting absolutely beat up by this cigar. Just 100% beat up. This is far too nuanced of a beer to be pairing with this Bishops Blend. I think I did do a misstep. I think possibly going to a stout might have been the right way to go. Maybe a stout would have been too much, but I can say that the flavor nuances of this beer is being 100% run over by the cigar, and I'm quite surprised by that.
Like I said before, I didn't know what to expect pairing the Ardbeg with the cigar, but I'm actually pleasantly surprised. The kind of hard candy kind of sweetness with the iodine and like all of those flavor notes that sound terrible. Iodine, tire, kind of like that salty, briny seawater. It brings out a ton of spice in the cigar, which I'm really enjoying. You still get kind of that richness, those chocolatey, earthy flavors, but it supercharges the spice.
I am getting a little bit of earthiness now that you say that at the halfway mark of the cigar. And like you said, it's that good kind of earthy. It's not that loamy kind of earthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of chewy kind of earthy. But I'm really, really struggling to pick up any flavor nuances from this beer because the cigar is just completely running it over. It's really disappointing to me. It's just nothing. Like it's just there's no flavor from this beer whatsoever. This cigar is 100% overpowering the beer, and I don't think I've ever had that on the show before. I've had pairings that miss, but I don't think I've had pairings that are such of a miss that I just can't pick up any flavor from this beer, and it makes me very, very sad because this is like I said, one of my favorite beers. I'm glad I have extra beers because this is a complete pairing misstep by me tonight.
Bummer.
Yeah.
I think this is the first episode in a few that I haven't had a bad pairing. I think all of these pairings are very good. Yeah. If I had to give them numbers,
Recap.
I would. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've already got the second two. It's the beer that I have to go back to. So I'll go in reverse order. The Ardbeg was a surprisingly good pairing. I mean, just it supercharges the flavors of the cigar, and the cigar brings out some of the notes that I don't usually get from Ardbeg, the fruitiness, and kind of the sweetness that usually I feel like Ardbeg is really lacking in sweetness. It's just kind of all smoke and oceany notes. So I would give that one a 91. The Legendario, I don't think I could find a cigar that would go under like an 88 for that.
Yeah.
I feel like that it's a weird liqueur that I can't see. Like, I'm not going to sit in front of the TV and drink 2 glasses of this in a night. I won't find myself ordering it in a bar when I'm out of the country, since of course you can't get it here. But I can't think of any cigar that would go badly with that. And I'm going to take a couple sips while you recap yours.
Yeah, so unfortunately, as I said, this is a 4 out of 5 beer. I have multiples of this beer. Possibly the lowest rating I've ever given to a pairing ever. I feel like this is a 78, 79. This is just a complete...
Ouch.
Yeah, it's a complete miss from pairing, and that's 100% on me. I literally can't taste anything at all from this beer. All I taste is the cigar. All I taste is the nuance of the cigar. Literally, I drink the beer and I get the wetness from the beer. I get zero flavor from the beer, which is just completely a disappointment for me. So that is what we would call a yard gar on Cigar Federation. So just a complete miss for me. By contrast, Unibroue, which is a much more full-bodied beer, and that's really where the wheelhouse of where I should have stuck. Unibroue is really, really good. That's an 89.90. I think you gotta go with something that's a little bit more full-bodied. Like we said, maybe a Belgian triple would also be an alternative choice here. You want to stay away from IPAs, but you do need a beer or a spirit that's a little bit more full-bodied, doesn't get run over. And The Flor which probably ranks as the 18, the Centenario 18, kind of ranks around an 86, 87 for me. I do think if I go back and try a Flor 12, I kind of have this sinking suspicion that the Flor 12 would probably rank in the 90-91 because it does have, it's a little bit more intense. It's not so subtle and nuanced. It's a little rougher. That might be the right pairing. Even though this cigar is nuanced, the cigar is just surprisingly full-bodied. 12, I think, is the way to go.
And so for the beer is surprisingly, because it got off to a really good start. It's surprisingly the worst pairing of the night for me, but that's really only because the other two are so good. So the beer I'd give an 88. It's a good pairing, but it could be a little better. And I think there are definitely cigars out there that'll go better with this coffee brown ale.
I almost think that what I'm getting tonight, Unibroue outstanding. I kind of feel like this cigar is maybe a little bit more apt to non-alcoholic beverages like a Dr. Pepper or something a little bit more fruity and intense, or a spirit like a bourbon or a really intense scotch, or as you're drinking the Ardbeg, a really peated scotch because it's got that flavor intensity. That might be the way to go. I personally feel like I really underestimated the intensity of the spirits and beverages I needed to pair with.
Yeah, I think I did too. I'm glad I knew what the Ardbeg tasted like, but the beer and the rum, I didn't really know what I was getting into. And surprisingly, the Ardbeg is the one that works the best, which I thought it was going to be a miss. I just wanted to try it.
Sometimes the best accidents are the fantastic accidents.
Yeah.
Trying to push that envelope. So, of course, we do have tomorrow night at our regular scheduled time of 8 p.m. Eastern or 6 p.m. Mountain, the only time zone that matters. We've got James Brown from Black Label Trading Company on the show. You'll definitely want to get your questions in for that. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got the IPCPR. We've got some new stuff happening with Black Label. And I think it's been a little while since we've had James on the show. Like, I want to say it's been like 5 or 6 months, maybe longer since we've had James on the show.
Definitely longer than that. He might have been on I don't know, late last year. Sometime between in the fourth quarter of last year, maybe.
And then, of course, there's a very good chance approaching 70% that I'm going to be on location next week. So Trippy's going to be flying with a guest co-host. Who do we have? Well, I guess we don't really have a schedule yet for sharing our pairings, which we'll have on our event calendar. We'll get that figured out in the next couple days. Yep. What do we have scheduled for Cigar Chat for next week?
Next week, we've got Phil Zangi from Debonair Cigars. I'm still talking to him about the exact scheduling because he's actually got an event that night that he'll be at. So we may push the time back or forward a little bit. But either way, he's going to be on the show.
Phil's always a good time. He's such, I hate to say it, but he's such a debonair guy. That's where the whole debonair ideal comes from. He's so positive. He's so easy to do an interview with, and he's so easy to have on Cigar Chat because you can just chat with him. He's just a normal guy who does cigars, who does rum, and he just makes for one of the most interesting and fun cigar chats.
Yeah, he's just a normal guy. He's super down to earth, but at the same time, he's got so much to talk about. He knows so much about tobacco, and he's the mad scientist of the tobacco world in that he's half of the weird processes that are out there he's created or had some part in, which is crazy.
Sneaks up on you. So make sure to tune in tomorrow night, get your questions in for James Brown of Black Label Trading Company and Blackworks. We'll be back tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. As we say on Sharing Our Pairings, we do want you to drink better. We do want you to drink less.